This is Fat to Fierce. Welcome to the Confidence Chronicles. I'm your host, Amy English. Join me on this empowering adventure towards a healthier relationship with food, body, and self, one delicious bite at a time. Welcome back to the Confidence Chronicles. I hope you're having a great week so far. So this episode is going to kick off a powerful 3-part series where we're going to explore what it really takes to stop the struggle with food and come back home to yourself. And if last week's episode lit something up in you, this week we're zooming in on part 1. So last week's episode, number 77, was about breaking the overeating cycle, building self-trust, and being free in your body. And today we're going to talk specifically about the first one, breaking the overeating cycle. And why we're going to talk about this today is because you cannot hate, shame, or control your way to peace with food or with your body. It just doesn't work. It's not sustainable. But the good news is that you can understand your way to peace. All right. And that's what we're going to focus on, understanding more about the overeating cycle. And this is going to be really important for anyone who really struggles with overeating, whether it be overeating, emotional eating, like stress eating, binge eating, just feeling powerless around food. Okay, we're going to break down how to start breaking that cycle. Okay. And the reason why this is so important is because I think so many people who struggle with food and who struggle with overeating share a common belief. And I used to share this belief too, okay? That if I just had more willpower, I wouldn't keep doing this. If I just had more willpower, I'd be able to stop this. And that's just not true. And we're going to get into that in more detail. But here's what I want to say right now. Overeating isn't just about discipline, okay? Sure, discipline has a role, but here's the thing. Discipline, willpower is only going to go so far, and it's not going to be sustainable because we're talking about a cycle, okay? And the reason willpower and discipline, motivation, diet, any of that stuff doesn't last long term is because I think of them as kind of surface level, okay? And when you're surface level and you're not understanding what's going on behind the scenes and what's really at play with this cycle when it comes to overeating, okay? And so if you're not seeing the whole picture and you're not understanding the cycle itself, then of course, any kind of discipline, willpower, motivation, whatever is only going to last so long. It's not because you're not getting at the root. You're not getting at what's going on underneath. And understandably so, right? Because you're not fully understanding it. So this is where what I do for a living, like my job, is to work with people and help them understand the cycle so that they can change it. Because once you understand it, once you see it, that is how you can make lasting, sustainable changes to your overeating cycle. Okay. And let's talk for a minute about what an overeating cycle is. And I know you've heard me talk about this before. So this might be repetitive for some people. Maybe it's not for other people. Here's what the cycle looks like. Okay. Every overeating cycle starts with a trigger. There is a trigger that kicks off the spin, so to speak, okay? So you have a trigger. Then that leads to overeating. And we're going to get into triggers. Hold on, okay? But you have a trigger. Then you have the overeating. Then you have the guilt, the shame, the why can't I stop this, okay? Which generally leads to restriction. Okay. Think about it. Think about your specific cycle when you're going through an overeat and you're mad about it and you feel bad about it and there's the guilt and the shame. What typically happens, at least this used to happen with me and with most of my clients, is that you go into like this restrictive mode of, I'm going to be better tomorrow. I'll do better tomorrow, which typically means reining it in, right? Restriction. Or maybe you're going to go on that diet again, or you're going to start following some other meal plan, whatever. Okay. But what happens then is usually then there's another trigger, right? Which kicks the whole thing off again. And it literally just becomes rinse and repeat over and over and over. And when we try to, force willpower or discipline or any of that kind of stuff, it's just addressing it at the top level. It's not getting into the nitty gritty of understanding the trigger and why that trigger leads to overeating in the first place. Okay. That's what we want to understand. And then once you understand that, and once you can see your specific cycle and understand your specific triggers, then it's going to make it easier to use some loving self-discipline. Remember, you get to create your own definition of self-discipline, friends, okay? If you're anything like me, I used to think self-discipline was like punishment, right? Almost has kind of like a nasty vibe to it. And I redefined that for myself. So the way I look at self-discipline is in a very loving way, and it is just honoring my commitment to yourself. And you can absolutely use that definition too. But it gets challenging in honoring your commitment to yourself when you don't understand what's kicking off the trigger. You see what I'm saying? So it's really helpful to get to know those triggers. And here's just a few examples. Okay, there's a ton more, but I'll just invite you to sit with these and see if any of them land for you, right? So there can be emotional triggers that kick off the cycle. And emotional triggers include stress, shame, loneliness, boredom. I mean, I would say, just based on my experience of doing this work for the last decade, I think stress is probably the number one emotional trigger for most people, and boredom would be number two. So many people choose to eat when they're bored. Like that's a trigger. Being bored is an emotional trigger that kicks off that cycle, right? And this is why when my teenagers tell me this summer that they're bored, my response to them is good. Be bored. Allow yourself to be bored. Accept the fact that there are going to be times in your life when you feel bored. It's not a problem. I think we live in this idea that we're supposed to be busy and having fun and living life to the fullest, like every waking minute. And I just think that's highly unrealistic. There are going to be times when you're bored. And when we can allow ourselves to accept that and feel that, we're going to be better off for it. Okay. Because we're not going to be looking to fill that space with something, i.e. food. Right. And I think that's why food is probably number two in terms of emotional triggers. Okay. Let me not continue that rant. But those are examples of emotional triggers. And then you have your physical triggers. Okay. And physical triggers could be something like under eating earlier in the day, right? Trying to be good, only to kind of go off the rails later in the evening. Okay. That's absolutely a physical trigger. Another, an example of a physical trigger for me was when I would be out at a party or with people at some sort of an event, right? I wouldn't eat because I was that kind of binge eater, right? I would not eat when I was in public, only to go home and just completely go off the rails, right, with food, and it would turn into a full-blown binge. Another type of physical trigger is tired, okay? Being tired from poor sleep. I can't tell you how many of my clients have been in that situation, being tired, and that would be the trigger for overeating, especially thinking that eating was going to help give some energy. right? If they were feeling really, really tired, oh, let me eat something that'll help me feel better, or just being so tired that they just didn't care anymore, right? And they just would just eat whatever, and it would turn into an overeating cycle, right? That's a type of physical trigger, being too tired, where you don't need food. What you probably need is a decent night's rest, right? But that's an example of a physical trigger. And then we have the mental triggers, which include food rules, right? The shoulds and the shouldn'ts, never helpful. Also, the all or nothing thinking when it comes to food, right? So, like, got to have it, have it all, or that harsh restriction. Okay, that's an example of a mental trigger, which will absolutely lead to overeating. And here's something that is really important to remember, and I'm just going to say it. Overeating is not a character flaw, okay? There's nothing wrong with you, okay? It is not anything that's wrong with you as a person, as a human. Overeating is a patterned response to an unmet need, okay? It is a pattern, it is a reaction, it is an action. It is a response. It is not you as the person. And I think that is so important. And it's especially important because when you can see that it's not something wrong with you, it's not a character flaw, it is a learned pattern or a learned response, that's going to make it easier, a little bit easier, to want to understand it. Okay? Because understanding it is how we change it. And here's why willpower doesn't work. Okay. We've all tried willpower so many times. Willpower is a short-term override. Okay. It is not a long-term solution. It's not intended to be a long-term solution. And so when we're trying to use willpower, of course it's going to fizzle out. Same as motivation. Honestly, the same as self-discipline, okay? These aren't intended to be long-lasting solutions. And willpower specifically, actually any of these, willpower, motivation, self-discipline, okay? None of them address what is driving the urge. And this is what I mean when I say that they're surface level, okay? They're not getting into the nitty-gritty and understanding what is driving the desire, the urge, the wanting to eat. And that's what we want to understand, okay? And willpower will often lead to rebellion or to that backlash, right? And that's where we hear, well, I was so good until I wasn't, because it just fizzles out, right? Not helpful. Now, there's a time and place for willpower, absolutely, but not when it comes to breaking the cycle. All right. It's just not going to work that way. And so, what we take away from this is that breaking the cycle of overeating, it's not about control. Control is not going to change it. It is about clarity, okay? Getting clear on understanding your specific overeating cycle. And this is very important, and you've probably heard me say this 100 times by now, if not more, it is about compassion, self-compassion, having compassion for you. And what does that sound like? It just sounds like not being a jerk to yourself. Okay? Having compassion for yourself is having that understanding. Okay? Like, yes, this has been a cycle for a really long time. I've been doing this for most of my life in some cases, right? Instead of beating myself up, because that never works, not long term, otherwise you still wouldn't have the habit, right? So instead of that, how about I just have a softer approach? And I think that's when I think of compassion, that's what I think of. I think of a softer approach, right? A softer voice, a more gentle tone, right? When it comes to talking to ourselves, the way we talk to ourselves and the way that we talk about ourselves. I think that that's really, really important. All right. So we talked about some of the triggers, but let's talk about some examples of overeating. There's lots of them. Okay. Just like there's lots of triggers. There's stress eating, which I have said is probably one of the most popular, one of the most common forms of overeating is stress eating. Like when you have a bad day at work, or when you get news, when you get life-altering news that just kind of turns your world upside down, stress eating, overwhelm, right? All that kind of comes together, and that will lead a lot of people to eat. So it happened to me when I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I spent that first month stress eating to the tune of 30 pounds. I gained 30 pounds in that first month of my diagnosis because I was stress eating, a very common form of overeating. Then there's mindless munching after work or during work. I had a client once who worked from home and used to graze throughout the day. Didn't want to do certain tasks at work, so she'd find herself in the kitchen picking at this and picking at that, just kind of mindlessly munching throughout the day. Comfort eating is also another very common type of overeating, turning to food for comfort, right? Allowing the food to be that kind of steady Eddie, or that comfort, that whoopee, if you will, all right, which I often describe it as. Another interesting and very common type of overeating is when screw it or F it comes in. Do you know what I'm talking about? This happens a lot. I think nearly every client I've worked with has had this occurrence where it is just like that screw it. It's almost like a giving up or a throwing in the white flag, or just like, I've been good enough. Screw it. F it. I don't want to deal with this anymore. That type of attitude. Okay. That can absolutely kick into an overeating cycle. And a lot of times it can show up before any of these other examples. So, like the stress eating, the mindless munching, or the comfort eating, or after a perceived failure. So, let's say you had like a really indulgent meal or something, and then you're just kind of like, screw it, I've already had this much, I might as well keep going, type of right mentality. That's going to kick into an overeating cycle, and that happens a lot. So I want to share a couple of examples today. I've got two specific client examples that I want to talk about, because some of these stories might land for you. They might resonate and help you see a pattern that you have, right? If nothing else, they're just going to help you realize that you're not alone, okay? Because so many people struggle with this. And we know this by how popular the GLP-1 medications have become, right? Because it's helping people control their eating. But again, and I'm not knocking anyone who's using a GLP-1. Let me just say that first. But even those medications are not getting to the root of why the overeating cycle continues. Okay. And this is why a lot of people are struggling when they come off the medication. If they haven't done the work to understand their patterns, then of course they're going to stop the medication and all the patterns are going to reemerge. Okay. That's what's happening. So again, this is where doing coaching, understanding your cycles, can be really, really beneficial and a complement to being on a GLP-1. Okay. But here's a story from one of my clients. Now, I would say she was my favorite, but most of my clients are my favorites. I just work with the most amazing women, truly. But this one particular client used to struggle with restaurants. Okay. Going out to eat. And she used to describe going out to eat like Candyland. It was her Candyland. Okay. The restaurant became a total free for all. And she would overeat every single time. And not because she didn't care. Okay. So it wasn't because she didn't care, because she did care. But it was because she felt like she couldn't not do it. Okay. It was a habit. The restaurant equaled overindulgence. And she would say, it's so frustrating. I know it's happening, but I don't know how to stop. And that is what so many of my clients say. Okay. They know that this is happening. They see it. They just don't know how to stop. And that's the work that we do together. Right. And so here's the thing. When you're stuck in a cycle like that, okay, where you don't know how to stop, it's not always about knowing better. It's about seeing what you're not seeing. Okay. That's the magic. That's how we change this. So, with this client, what we did is we slowed everything down. Okay. We got curious. We slowed down the conversation. We looked at what she was thinking and feeling in those moments at the restaurant. Like, what was she making the restaurant experience mean? It's a very powerful question, by the way. What are you making it mean? And it turns out that for her, going out to eat wasn't just about the food, it was her escape. It was her moment to finally relax, to feel good, to have fun, i.e., Candyland. It was like giving herself a permission slip she didn't get anywhere else. And once she saw that, everything shifted. Because now she wasn't just fighting the urge, she was understanding the need behind it. Okay. And that's the power of awareness. So, what happened next is she started asking herself, like before she went out to eat, because she would go to restaurants pretty regularly, probably like once a week or so. And so she started asking herself, how do I want to feel when I leave this restaurant? And from that place, she began to make more mindful choices, not perfect ones, not rule based ones, but conscious ones. Okay. That's the difference. And it's really important to note here that the habit didn't vanish overnight. Okay. It doesn't change overnight. So anyone looking for like immediate overnight results, if you're really looking at this and you're understanding it and starting to dig in, it's not going to happen overnight. It's not a light switch, especially when you consider how long these overeating patterns have been happening. Okay. So it didn't her habit didn't vanish overnight, but the cycle started to loosen. All right. And that's because she wasn't blind to it anymore. She could see it. Okay. And so she started to make the different choices. And some of those choices, like I'll give you some of the examples, were that when they went out to eat, they wouldn't get the appetizer, right? Or they wouldn't get the dessert, or they would split a meal, or she got in the habit of, boxing up half of her meal when it came, because we all know portions are ridiculous, right? And so she got in the habit of boxing up the half of her meal before she even started eating. And that was really helpful for her. So it's about finding tools that help you. Like once you see the cycle and once you see what was driving it, then being able to make conscious choices and finding ways to help support you. Okay. Moving forward. And I think that what's important to remember too is that so many of our overeating patterns aren't necessarily about the food. I mean, I get it. Some of them are. Some food tastes really good. You really, really like it. But many of the patterns aren't about the specific food. They're about what we've linked the food to. Okay. So, what is that connection with food? And when you slow down and look at what you're feeling, what you're thinking, and what you're trying to escape or soothe, that's really when the cycle starts to crack open. That's when we get to see behind the scenes. Okay. And I want to share one other client story with you because I think this is a really helpful one too. So I had a client where she had younger children, okay? And every afternoon, like after school, when like right around the time that the school bus was rolling in to drop them off at home, okay? Every afternoon, like clockwork, she found herself mindlessly snacking. All right. I can remember her saying that it felt like the pantry was calling her, calling her name. And listen, if you know what that feels like, right? So it was chips or chocolate, like whatever was around, she was munching right before the school bus pulled up. Okay. And at first, she thought this was just a habit, like we do, right? And it is. But when we looked deeper, she realized it wasn't even about hunger. It was about relief. And I think that's really eye-opening too when you realize it's not about physical hunger, okay? She wasn't physically hungry when she was doing this. For her, it was about relief. It was that moment or those few minutes before the kids walked through the door. And listen, if you have young kids, kids at all, right? And remember to those younger days, I remember it well. When they would get off the bus in the afternoon and come home, it was like a chaotic thing, right? Because then you've got homework and you've got dinner, and if you've got after school sports or activities, right? All that stuff going on, especially when they're younger. It's interesting because both of my kids, I have a 16 and a 17-year-old now. They both have driver's licenses. They drive. It's real weird here. It's like a whole new world. In fact, I will share this really quickly. The other day, my son they both have private lessons for their instruments. And my son had his tuba lesson. He plays the tuba, sousaphone, and marching band. And I was like, oh, we got to coordinate when to get Ryan to his lesson. And my husband looked at me and he's like, no, we don't. I'm like, what are you talking about? He said he can drive himself. And I'm like, oh my word. Like, it's such a weird space to be in when both of your kids are driving. Anyway, for her, this few minutes before the kiddos walked through the door, that was her last bit of calm before the chaos of the late afternoon and evening kicked in, right? And she realized, like, with all that chaos, with everything that would go on then, like, there was no real pause for her again until bedtime. Okay. Which again is really common, especially when you have young kiddos. And let me be really clear here. Okay. This is not about this. This isn't about the kids. We're not blaming the kids. We're not blaming the mom here. Okay. We're just taking a closer look at what was kind of creating this cycle with food. Okay. And what she realized is that she was using food to mark that transition in her day, almost to brace herself. Okay. This was really wild when she was able to see this, and really empowering. Food had become her buffer, almost like her deep breath. Okay. It was her tiny escape before everything sped up again. And here's the beautiful part. Once she saw that, that's when the cycle started to shift. Because now, instead of saying, ugh, why can't I stop doing this? Meaning, why can't I stop mindlessly eating, every day at this time? She could say, okay, this is where I'm trying to create some space for myself. That awareness made all the difference. She started checking in and asking herself, what do I really need in this moment? Sometimes it was a snack, okay? Sometimes it was the chocolate, and that's okay, right? But other times, it was a few deep breaths, a meditation, a stretch, a moment of quiet on the front porch. Something that gave her the reset she was actually craving. See what I mean? What she was craving wasn't necessarily the food. It was that feeling, right? And she had just been so used to using food to get that feeling. Once you're onto yourself and once you see it, that is your moment of freedom, okay? When you can name the need behind the behavior, you're no longer stuck in autopilot. You're back in the driver's seat. That's not about restriction, okay? That's about reconnection. And that's what breaks the cycle, one conscious moment at a time. What you've heard today are stories from two different women, two different habits, okay? But the same truth underneath it all. Neither of them needed more willpower. What they needed was awareness, the ability to pause, to get curious, to ask, what's really going on here? Because once they did that, they weren't stuck anymore. They could choose, not perfectly, but intentionally. And that's what this is all about. Not control, not shame, not another rule. What breaks the cycle is one conscious, self-honoring choice at a time. All right, so let's talk about what that actually looks like. Like when the urge hits, what the heck do you do? All right. How do you meet yourself with compassion instead of criticism? How do you shift the pattern without shame? Here are some tools that disrupt the loop. Okay. These are tools that will actually help break the cycle and do all of that. Okay. Meet yourself with compassion instead of criticism and shift the pattern without shame. Number one is going to be awareness. Okay. Notice the urge, notice it, see it, and pause before reacting. Y'all know I love to practice the pause. It's very important. Number two, get curious. Okay. Curiosity. What's happening here instead of what's wrong with me? I mean, can we just take a moment to sit with that one? Okay. Just picture this. Every time you notice yourself saying, what's wrong with me? Stop and ask, what's happening here? That alone is such a powerful shift. Okay. What's happening here? First of all, it's going to stop finger pointing and placing the blame on yourself. Okay. Most important. And also, it's going to open up for you to see, like, what is actually going on here? What is happening? And that's going to help you have some more information, because the truth of the matter is there's nothing wrong with you. You just have an old habit pattern at play. All right. So, curiosity. What's happening here? 3, alternatives. Finding alternative things to do in the moment. Okay. That could be journaling. That could be walking. That could be doing a happy dance in your kitchen. That could be singing when you find yourself standing in front of your pantry. Cause yeah, I used to do that. That was actually super helpful in the early stages of me changing my cycle. Okay. Standing in front of the pantry, singing a damn song. Oh, I'm here again. I'm standing in front of the pantry again. Okay, I'm not going to torture you further with that singing, but that's what I would do. When I would notice myself standing in front of the pantry, looking for something, searching for something, I would start singing a song. And that was enough for me to realize, oh, hold on. What's going on? What's happening here? Okay, curiosity. There you go. So that was finding alternatives. And then here's another good one. This is another tool to disrupt the loop. Reminding yourself you're safe. Safety is a big one, okay? Especially for folks who have struggled with food and overeating for a long time. Reminding yourself that you're safe. Reminding yourself that you're allowed to eat, okay? But you also get to choose. Very important. Breaking the cycle. I want to say this. Breaking the cycle of overeating doesn't mean that you never overeat again. Okay. So just understand that. It means you meet yourself differently when it does happen. And that's what's going to start to change the cycle. And you'll start to notice it's not happening as often. So it's not happening as frequently. And the intensity of it starts to reduce as well, meaning you're not eating as much, right? It's not lasting as long. The instances become farther and fewer between, if that makes sense. If I'm saying that right, I think I'm saying that right. But the thing is, you simply cannot hate, shame, or control your way there. It's going to make it so much more challenging and just kind of keep It's like putting gasoline on the cycle. Okay. It's just going to keep it spinning. But understanding, you can absolutely understand your way to peace, to freedom, to that empowerment. Okay. And that's really, really helpful to know and important. All right. Okay. So to wrap this up for today, what is one pattern you're starting to see differently now after listening to this episode? Is there something you're starting to see a little bit differently now in your patterns? And what might be one small thing, like let's look at like a baby step or a turtle step. That's what we used to call them in coaching. In episode 77, I could not think of I kept calling it baby steps and I couldn't think of the other term. Turtle steps, okay? Slow, gentle steps, small steps. What is one small thing you can do when you notice your pattern showing up next? Just try it, play with it, experiment with it, right? Allow yourself to get curious, okay? Every time you bring awareness instead of judgment, every time you pause instead of powering through, you're not just breaking the pattern, you are reclaiming your power. Okay. Next week, we are going deeper into the second piece of this puzzle, how to rebuild trust with yourself after years of doubting, dieting, and starting over. You don't want to miss it. So I will see you then. Have a great week. Are you ready to break free from stress eating and body shaming? It's time to get fierce. Fat to Fierce is a self-paced program that helps you build a new foundation of strength and balance without the toxic dieting mindset. This non-diet approach focuses on mindful eating, body acceptance, and lasting transformation. It's time to reclaim your power and find peace with food, your body, and yourself. Visit amyenglishcc.com to get started today.